Seth called me selfish the night before his wedding. He said it quietly, almost casually, like he was commenting on the weather. We were standing in the parking lot of the Rehearsal dinner venue, a steakhouse he'd picked because his fiancée, Melody, had seen it on Instagram, and I had just handed him an envelope containing a cashier's check for $42,000. Every cent I had saved over 4 years of working double shifts at the hospital, skipping vacations, driving a 2009 Honda Civic with a cracked dashboard and a passenger window that only rolled down halfway. He looked at the check. He looked at me. And then he said, "I figured it'd be more." I laughed. I actually laughed because I thought he was joking. He wasn't. Let me back up. My brother's name is Seth. He's 28, 3 years younger than me. And for most of our lives, I have loved him the way you love someone you watched grow up. Fiercely, protectively, sometimes irrationally. He was the kid who cried at the end of every movie, who kept a box of his childhood drawings under his bed until he was 19, who called me when he got his first apartment just to say the refrigerator made a weird sound, and he wasn't sure what to do about it. He was my person. That's the only way I can explain why I did what I did. Our parents divorced when Seth was 9 and I was 12. My dad moved 2 states away and eventually started a second family. My mom worked constantly. She was kind and she was tired, always tired. So by default, I became the one Seth came to. I helped him with homework. I drove him to baseball practice when Mom picked up extra shifts. I co-signed his first car loan at 23 when my own credit was still fragile from nursing school. I was there. So when he met Melody 3 years ago and started talking about buying a house, and when he just mentioned, casually over dinner, that they were having trouble saving for a down payment, I started thinking I'd been saving for myself, for my own apartment eventually. Maybe a small house somewhere with a yard and a garden and enough quiet that I could actually sleep before a 12-hour shift. I had $42,000 set aside and I was maybe 2 years away from being ready to buy something. But Seth was my brother, and Melody seemed at the time lovely, warm. She made him laugh in a different way than I'd ever seen him laugh before. At Christmas that year, she'd hugged me for a long time and said, "I'm so glad Seth has you." So I made a decision. I told myself it wasn't a gift. It was an investment in my family. I told myself Seth would do the same for me. I told myself a lot of things. I called my bank in January and had the cashier's check drawn up. I planned to give it to him the night before the wedding, privately, so it wouldn't overshadow anything. I wanted it to feel like a quiet, meaningful moment between siblings. No audience, no performance. I drove to the rehearsal dinner with the envelope in my purse and a knot in my stomach that I chose to ignore. After dinner, I pulled Seth aside in the parking lot. I told him I'd been thinking about what he and Melody needed to get started. I told him I wanted him to have something real, something that would matter. I handed him the envelope. He opened it. He read the number. And then he said, "I figured it'd be more." I stood there for a moment. The parking lot lights were buzzing. Someone inside the restaurant dropped something, and I heard a burst of laughter through the glass door. "What?" I said. He shrugged. "Melody and I talked about it. We thought maybe 60. That's what we actually need for the neighborhood we want." "Seth?" I said slowly. "I've been saving this for 4 years." "I know," he said. "I'm not trying to be ungrateful. I just thought you'd want to give us what we actually need." He tucked the envelope into his what we actually need. He tucked the envelope into his jacket pocket. No thank you. No acknowledgement of what that number represented. He just put it in his pocket like it was a card with $20 in it, and then he glanced at his phone and said he needed to get back inside. Melody was probably wondering where he was. I stood in that parking lot alone for a long time. I want to be honest about what I felt in those minutes. Not just the anger, though the anger was real, solid, like something I could have held in my hands. Underneath it was something quieter and worse. The specific grief of realizing that the person you built your whole protective instinct around does not see you the way you see them. That the version of Seth I'd been loving and sacrificing for and showing up for was at least partly a version I had invented. I drove home. I did not sleep. The wedding was the next afternoon. a Saturday in late April outdoor ceremony at a vineyard 40 minutes outside the city. I was the maid of honor. I had given a toast at the rehearsal dinner that made Melody cry happy tears. I had organized the bachelorette weekend, driven to 3 different bakeries to find the exact macarons Melody wanted for the dessert table, and spent 2 weekends making centerpiece arrangements with her mother because the florist they'd booked canceled 6 weeks out. I sat in the front row and watched my brother get married, and I smiled every time a camera pointed at me. At the reception, Melody pulled me into a hug and said, "I heard about what you did, the check," Seth told me. She had this particular smile on her face that I hadn't seen before. Not warm exactly, more like satisfied. "You're such a good sister." Something shifted in me when she said that, not dramatically, more like a gear quietly clicking into a new position. "Glad I could help," I said. I went to the bar and got a glass of water. I thought about the $42,000 in that envelope in Seth's jacket pocket. I thought about the lease I'd signed in 2021 and broken early because Seth needed me to co-sign his car and my debt-to-income ratio was already stretched. I thought about the trip to Portugal I'd been planning for 3 years that I kept pushing back because there was always something. Seth's car, Seth's moving expenses, now Seth's down payment. I thought about the cracked dashboard in my Honda. I figured it'd be more. I went back to the table and I sat through the rest of the reception. I danced with my mom during the mother-son dance because she'd been drinking champagne since noon, and I didn't want her to fall. I cut the cake. I smiled. And then, on Monday morning, I called my bank. Here is what most people don't know about cashier's checks. If the check hasn't been deposited yet, the issuing bank can place a stop payment under certain conditions, and you can work with the bank to have the funds returned to your account. It requires documentation, and it takes time, and it doesn't always work, but it can work. I had consulted a financial advisor friend the previous week, before the rehearsal dinner, not because I suspected anything, just because I was nervous about moving that much money and wanted to understand my options, so I already knew this was theoretically possible. I called her Monday morning, and then I called my bank. Seth had not deposited the check yet. They were on their honeymoon in Cancun. I had a narrow window. I am not going to pretend I wasn't scared. I was terrified. My hand shook the entire time I was on the phone. I kept second-guessing myself. Maybe I'd misheard him. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe he'd been nervous and it came out wrong. But I kept coming back to the same thing. He had taken the envelope, put it in his pocket, and said nothing else. No call that night. No text the next morning before the ceremony. Nothing. If it had mattered to him, he would have said something. It took 4 business days and a significant amount of paperwork. But on Thursday afternoon, I got a notification that the funds had been returned to my account. I sat at my kitchen table and stared at my phone screen for a long time. They came home from Cancun on a Sunday. Seth texted me a photo of a sunset from the trip and said, "Miss you already, wish you could have come." I sent back a heart emoji. I was not ready to have the conversation yet. I needed to be calm. I needed to be clear. He tried to deposit the check on Tuesday. He called me 11 minutes later. "What happened to the check?" he said. Not a question. His voice was flat in a way I hadn't heard before. "It's been returned," I said. "The funds are back in my account." Why? I had rehearsed this moment probably 40 times over the previous 2 weeks. I had imagined it going all sorts of ways. I thought I might cry. I thought I might go cold and clinical. What actually happened was that I felt very steady, almost preternaturally calm, and I said the thing I'd been turning over since that parking lot. "Because you said you figured it'd be more," I said, "and you put it in your pocket without saying thank you. And then you didn't reach out again. Not that night. Not before the ceremony. Not once on your honeymoon. And I realized that what I'd given you wasn't enough to make you feel grateful, which means it wasn't enough to mean anything, which means it probably shouldn't be given." Silence. "That was one moment," he said finally. "I was stressed. You can't just, that's my down payment. That's our house." "It was my savings," I said. "It was 4 years of my life. And the thing is, Seth, if our positions were reversed, and you had worked 4 years to save $42,000 for me, and I'd said what you said, you'd still be mortified. You'd still be apologizing. You know that." More silence. Melody is going to lose it, he said. Probably, I agreed. She did. She called me 20 minutes after Seth and I got off the phone. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. I let that go too. The voicemail she left was, I'll say this carefully, not kind. She used the word sabotage multiple times. She said I had been jealous of her relationship with Seth from the beginning. She said I had planned this, that the timing was calculated to humiliate them. She said some other things I'm choosing not to repeat. I listened to the voicemail once, saved it, and did not respond. My mom called that evening. She'd heard from Seth. She was upset in a different way than Melody. Quieter, more confused than angry. I don't understand, she kept saying. You gave it to him. You decided to give it to him. You decided to give it to him. I did, I said. And then I changed my mind. You can't do that. I already did, I said gently. Mom, he told me he figured it'd be more. He said that while he was holding a cashier's check for $42,000, he didn't say thank you. He just went back inside. She was quiet for a moment. He said he was under a lot of stress. I know. I love him. I'm not trying to destroy him. But I can't keep pretending that the way he treats me is okay because he's under stress. She said she needed to think. I told her that was fine. I told her I loved her. We hung up. The next few weeks were difficult in the specific way that family estrangements are difficult. Not dramatic, just a constant low-grade ache. Seth didn't reach out. Melody sent me a long text that was part accusation, part negotiation, in which she suggested that if I returned at least $30,000, they could consider the matter resolved. I read it twice and archived it. My financial advisor friend helped me reallocate the money. I paid off the remainder of my car, the cracked dashboard Honda, and put the rest back in a high-yield savings account. I booked the Portugal trip, non-refundable this time on purpose. About 6 weeks after the wedding, my mom called again. She sounded different, tired in a different way. Not the tired of working too many shifts, but the tired of someone who had been doing a lot of thinking. I talked to Seth, she said. Really talked to him. Asked him to tell me exactly what happened in the parking lot. He told me. I waited. He said what he said, she continued. And I asked him if he'd apologized, and he said he hadn't, because he felt like you'd overreacted. A long pause. I told him I disagreed. I closed my eyes. I'm not taking sides, she said carefully. But I want you to know that I hear you. And I think you've been giving a long time, and maybe nobody said thank you enough, including me. I didn't cry until after we hung up. Then I sat on my bathroom floor and cried for about 20 minutes, which felt appropriate. Seth reached out in month 2. Not an apology, exactly. More of an opener. A text that said, "Can we talk sometime?" I waited 3 days and then said yes. We had coffee at a neutral place, a cafe neither of us had been to before. It was uncomfortable and halting, and we didn't resolve everything. But he said, I know what I said was wrong. He said it looking at the table, not at me, but he said it. I told him I wasn't ready to pretend everything was fine. I told him I still loved him, but that I needed him to understand that my resources, my money, my time, my energy, were not infinite, and they were not automatic. That I was a person who also had needs and a future I was trying to build. He nodded. He didn't say much. But he didn't leave either. Melody is still cool with me. That's the honest answer. We are polite at family events and nothing more. I've accepted that this is probably how it will be for a while. Maybe longer. I went to Portugal in October. I spent 10 days there alone, which I had never done before, traveled completely alone, and it was one of the best experiences of my life. I ate dinner by myself at a restaurant overlooking the water, and I did not feel lonely. I felt like someone who had made a decision about her own life and then actually followed through on it. I saved my brother from a debt he didn't appreciate. I know that's not how he sees it. I know there are people who will read this and think I was vindictive, that I engineered a situation, that I punished him for one bad moment. Maybe that's fair. I've thought about that a lot. But here's the thing I keep coming back to. The $42,000 was never the point. The point was the parking lot, the buzzing lights and the envelope and the way he said, "I figured it'd be more," and just walked away. The point was 4 years of early mornings and missed trips and a cracked dashboard and the assumption, his assumption, comfortable and unexamined, that I would keep giving because I always had. You cannot keep funding a relationship that only flows one direction. At some point, the bank closes. Mine closed on a Tuesday, 4 business days after I made the call. I don't regret it. I bought myself a new car last spring. Nothing fancy, a practical sedan, good gas mileage, drives smooth. The dashboard is intact. I take care of myself now. It turns out that's not the same as being selfish. It just took me a while to learn the difference. I've thought a lot about what made me pick up the phone that Monday morning. It wasn't rage. Rage had already burned off by Sunday. It wasn't revenge either, at least not in the way people usually mean that word. It was something quieter, something closer to clarity. For most of my adult life, I operated under a belief I'd never actually examined, that loving someone meant absorbing whatever they gave you, good or bad, and continuing to show up anyway. I thought that was loyalty. I thought that was what family meant. What I didn't understand, and what the parking lot outside that steakhouse finally taught me, is that there's a difference between loving someone and funding the version of yourself they find convenient. Seth didn't become who he was overnight, and I didn't become someone who accepted it overnight either. These things build slowly, almost imperceptibly, the way water shapes stone. You co-sign one loan. You cancel one trip. You skip one thing you wanted, so someone else can have something they asked for. None of it feels like a pattern in the moment. It just feels like being a good sister. But patterns have a way of revealing themselves eventually. And when Seth stood in that parking lot holding $42,000 of my life and told me he'd expected more, that was the moment the whole shape of it became visible. Not just that night. All of it. Years of it. The assumption, comfortable and unexamined, that I would give because I always had. That my resources were a tap that didn't need maintaining. What I did with the check wasn't punishment. I want to be clear about that, mostly for myself. Punishment implies I wanted him to suffer. I didn't. I wanted him to understand that actions accumulate. That how you treat someone on an ordinary Tuesday or in a parking lot on a Thursday night is how you're actually treating them, not the version of yourself you perform at Christmas. And understanding that has a cost sometimes. The hard part isn't making the call to the bank. The hard part is sitting with the discomfort of choosing yourself when you've spent years defining your value through what you give. There's a particular guilt that comes with it. This low hum of maybe I'm the problem, maybe I'm being cold, maybe I'm overreacting. That doesn't go away quickly. I won't pretend it did for me. But here's what I've come to understand. Integrity isn't what you do when it's easy. It's what you do when it costs you something. When Seth and I sat across from each other at that cafe 2 months later and he said quietly, "I know what I said was wrong. That moment only existed because I had been willing to let there be consequences, not to hurt him, but to tell the truth about what had happened between us in the only language that had gotten through." I don't think I'm a better person than Seth. I think I got tired first. And getting tired, finally. Honestly tired of shrinking, of adjusting, of measuring out my own needs in careful spoonfuls so other people stayed comfortable, was the most clarifying thing that ever happened to me. Portugal was just a trip. But I ate that dinner alone overlooking the water, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Like my life was actually mine. That's worth more than $42,000. It's worth more than being called a good sister. It just took me a while to believe that.